Welcome to DreamMachine. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And we're going to do something very special today. So, do you want to tell everybody what's going on?
Yeah, so as you guys know, over the past year, we posted out a poll for you guys to vote on which animated series based on a DreamWorks movie that you wanted us to cover. And so I know it's taken a long time, and I'm very, very sorry, but we have the results. And so overwhelmingly, at 27%, you guys voted on DreamWorks Dragons.
That's not overwhelmingly. That's 27% of the people that you asked.
Okay, yeah, true. But at least a good...
the winner of the poll was 27%.
Yeah, it was DreamWorks Dragons. And so, this is going to be really interesting considering that DreamWorks Dragons is the one that actually lasted the longest out of all of the other DreamWorks series that has ever lasted. I mean, some of them have lasted for maybe like 2-3 seasons. I think one of them's lasted for maybe like 5, but no, DreamWorks Dragons has lasted for 8, and there's 3 different incarnations of it. So the first one we're going to be doing is season 1, and it's called Dragons Riders of Berk, and we're going to be doing something similar to what we've just done with like the Owl House or Amphibia or Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur discussions, in which we're going to be splitting it off into 2. So we're going to be talking about season 1A, which is essentially the first 10 episodes.
Yeah. So beginning with this is the first episode, which is how to start a Dragon Academy. So the very start of this is that having made peace now and living with the Vikings, the dragons' natural behavior is leading to chaos in the Isle of Berk. This is causing Stoic to reconsider allowing dragons to roam freely on Berk. It is Hiccup and his friends who have to convince him otherwise. So the great thing about this show is that we are starting off right off after the first movie, and obviously there's going to be problems, obviously just to let dragons roam free around the place, and so this is actually addressing like all the problems that they have now with dragons now in their lives, and now we're going around the island, and it's causing problems for the villagers, it's causing problems for the buildings, it's causing problems for like the infrastructure, it's causing problems for like the livestock that's currently in there, and so this I think is a great setup for what we're eventually going to be going through over the next couple of episodes. So we're also introduced to a new antagonist, which his name is Mildew, and he is actually living on the island, but everyone seems to know that he's pretty much bad news because they purposely built his house like on the other side of the island where he can't go into town.
Yeah, and Mildew is one of the very, very few people in the island of Berk who is opposed of dragons. Very similar to pretty much everybody was in the first movie, in which they all hated dragons and they just killed them off. And now everybody is sort of accepting of them except for Mildew. And Mildew tries his very best to convince everybody that dragons are bad, dragons are evil, dragons cannot be trained, and he eventually gets some people even on his side, but then eventually Hiccup and his friends are able to convince otherwise, saying no, dragons can be trained and dragons were not the cause of this, and there's a logical explanation on why the dragons are acting this way. We can be able to solve it. And so it basically just puts off Mildew with trying to convince the town of the bad things that dragons are able to do.
Well, I think this was a very smart thing to do, I think, for the TV show, because this isn't just about like Mildew just being like hey, I'm the Saturday cartoon villain, like that's not his purpose here. If you remember back in Lion King 2 Simba's Pride, after Scar had been killed and Simba had took his place like as the Lion King, obviously there was many people who sided with Scar who did not want to be part of like this new order that Simba is now orchestrating from Pride Rock. So Mildew makes sense in this because he's part of like the old ways of doing things. Like he still believes that dragons are a problem, and he's in some of the things that he says that he's justified in doing so. Obviously we'll get towards the end of the further into the episodes, and we'll learn more about his sinister side. But he is seen somewhat as a sympathetic villain because in a way he was purposed on like keeping the livestock safe, and obviously growing like the vegetables and things like that. Like he was a farmer, and also he needed to keep things safe from the dragons, and now he can't do that anymore because now that the dragons are now roaming free on the Isle of Berk, so that's causing him problems, and also it's causing the problems of the fact that he can't hunt dragons anymore because now it's no longer he's pretty much forbidden by Stoic.
Yeah.
So there is he is a villain that I think would obviously probably even dare I say Stan Lee probably would also kind of write as well, because it is a villain that was meant in some sort of ways. He has now been somewhat wronged in something that's happened in an event, and therefore now that those events have now motivated that character to do the things that he does.
Yeah,
So.
and that's a very justifiable villain where, he has explanations on why he does it, because he is sticking into the old ways. He's not going to be accustomed to the new ways, because the new ways are just very foreign to him. And all the dragons are wild, vicious animals, and they haven't been properly trained. And so Stoic gives Hiccup the permission to use the old battlegrounds where they used to train people to...
Well, no, he didn't give him he said that, they're basically using the old dragon arena because nobody uses it anymore, because no one hunts dragons.
Right.
So, for them, he basically just took it over because no one else was using it.
Yeah, and now he's using it as an academy to train dragons and dragon trainers.
Yeah, but then Stoic did, at the end did, given the fact he found that, Hiccup could, train these dragons to do certain things, he did give them the permission to then use it as the Dragon Academy.
Yes.
Basically, so that's our first episode. By the way, good initial episode, I think, to have, because you need to reestablish. And by the way, it doesn't just go to you need to watch the first movie and understand what happened. No, they give you the great thing that they do is Hiccup basically gets some explanation to what the episode is about, or what events have happened. They give that at the very beginning, which I think is smart, because the one thing I think that. You've got to assume is that not everybody is watched How to Train Your Dragon. You've got to assume that the general audience viewer has never seen this before, and this is a brand new show for them. And so it may be okay for the How to Train Your Dragon fans, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good for the the general viewer. So it's good that they put those explanations in. And by the way, they don't just leave it to the first couple of episodes. They do this with every episode that we go in. They you have Hiccup giving an initial explanation, and then you give Hiccup basically giving a closure to the episode. I think that's really good storytelling.
Yeah, and they did the similar narration throughout the course of the movies as well, in which Hiccup would be introducing everything that's happening in Berk and all the events and all the characters. So again, very consistent with the presentation that they were able to do from the movies over to the TV show. And a good thing about the TV show is that, unlike most TV shows which are based off of movies, they actually got most of the voice actors from the movies to reprise their role in the TV show. Mm-hmm. And that's fantastic, because usually they would have sound-alikes, because it's a lot cheaper than the celebrities. And obviously certain characters like Stoic, who was originally performed by various other celebrities, of course he's not going to be in there, and he had somebody else to replace him. But for the most part, the voice actors for Hiccup, Astrid, Fishlegs, all the other characters, they're all performed by their respected voice actors that were in the movies. And it makes it sound a lot more consistent, and it's a lot more easier of a watch to go through, as opposed to here's a TV series on, this movie, and it's a completely different actor than what you are accustomed to. He may maybe capture the spirit of it, but that it sounds a little bit slightly off. So yeah, again, kudos for that. And, kudos for kind of capturing the animation of the DreamWorks Dragons, from the movies as well. I mean, sure, it's not going to be as detailed as it was compared to the movies. I mean, yeah, they're going to be working on a much shorter budget, but again, they were able to make it look like it is from said movie. So again, well done.
And by the way, if you're wondering who plays Mildew, it's Stephen Root, would you believe?
Yeah, Stephen Root, Bill Dotrey from King of the Hill.
Yeah, and also face from the Coen Brothers movie as well. So
and the mayor from Amphibia.
Yeah, exactly. So it's also, there's also actually a very interesting voice actress that actually appears at the very end of discussion. So, but we'll leave her until last.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but for the most part, Jay Baruchel, America Ferrera, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, T.J. Miller, Zach Perlman, all those voice actors from the movie are in the TV show. And like I said before, Stoic is not voiced by Gerard Butler. It's instead voiced by Nolan North, who you may know who is the voice of Nathan Drake in the Uncharted video games, or Desmond Dials from Assassin's Creed, or he's a very prominent video game voice actor.
I think that's what makes Dragons so good, is they haven't just got some one-timey voice actors, or they're not just like got the production crew basically just like adding additional voices. They actually the casting I think has been fantastic. I think for this, I think that's what gives it some of its strong points. I think, and the one thing I'll definitely say is that off the beginning, this is something you'll see throughout the episodes. I mean, obviously it's not going to have like the same DreamWorks quality as like the How to Train Your Dragon movies. Of course it isn't. Like it's got a budget, and but even then, like what you're seeing on the screen isn't necessarily like the features of the product. It's more in the voice acting, it's more in the music, it's more in like the storytelling. It's more the fact that we're bridging the first movie to the second movie.
Yes.
At this point, and so I think that is what makes Dragons I think a very good series. And as we go through episode I think you'll see what we mean.
Yeah, and shout out to a lot of the people who were in production for this series as well, like John Pisano, who is the composer. And yeah, I know that it's going to be a tough act to follow from John Powell, who did the music for the movies, but he also did pretty good production of the TV series. You may know him for doing Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. He also did the Marvel TV series like Daredevil and the Defenders. He also composed for various video games as well, so he does a fine job. And yeah, I mean, the series was developed by Linda and Mike Terrava, who also did a phenomenal job of capturing consistently on what made not only the original books by Cressida Cowell really good, but also the work that Chris Sanders was able to do for the How to Train Your Dragon films. And a fun fact, this is actually the very first DreamWorks animated series that did not air on Nickelodeon. This is Cartoon Network, because as you remember, Nickelodeon was the one at the time who aired a lot of the DreamWorks shows. Like they did Penguins of Madagascar, they did Kung Fu Panda series of awesomeness, they did the Monsters vs. Aliens TV series. So because that, DreamWorks Dragons was going to be a little bit more darker and not relying too much of the goofy humor that all the other shows based off of their respective movies were going to be doing, that's when they decided, let's just move it over to Cartoon Network instead.
Yeah, so I think good move. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so we move on to our second episode, which is Viking for Hire. So the piece with the dragons has put Gobber out of business as a weaponry blacksmith. Feeling responsible, Hiccup tries to find a new job for Gobber. However, Gobber is a slightly eccentric and overenthusiastic personality makes this very difficult. And I think this is very good because once again, this is another consequence of the actions of the movie, and that is that Gobber now obviously his thing is making weapons, but there's no dragons to fight. So what is he going to do? So if anything, that he's trying to. At one point, he goes into like a home shopping channel kind of like thing of like saying, "Hey, this is all good cutlery that you could have, or like this is very good things that you can have for the garden, things like that." And like everything's just like a big massive disaster. And so you really do feel for Gobber at this point because good grief, what do you do in that situation? And obviously Mildew, this is one thing I hate. I think that makes Mildew such a good villain is that he always sticks it into to Hiccup because Mildew knows that Hiccup is responsible for the reason why the dragons are all there now and everything like that. So I think it's very good. Like every time a bad thing happens, Mildew's always there to stick in the knife, and he's there to get the boos and the jeers from the crowd and everything. So I think he's very well timed. I think in all of this, and then also you got poor Hiccup who's having to make this work somehow, and Gobber is not going to make that easy for him because obviously his personality just doesn't allow it. And a very good episode, I think, in that regard, because it's dealing with Hiccup having to deal with a very difficult personality, in Gobber. So.
Yeah, and especially when you have Gobber trying to help Stoic out with being his assistant to being the chief of Berk. And so, you're going to have, Gobber christening this baby. We're going to name him Marcus. It's like, she's a girl. It's like, his name is Marcus. And you're going to have, Gobber basically.
Magnus, I think is.
Yeah, Magnus, yeah. Yeah, so Magnus is the name of this girl that Gobber christens, and then he tries to help out with a whole bunch of other things that are happening in the town, but it ends up in a disaster. And so you have Hiccup trying to ease Gobber into saying that you can't do this anymore, and so he's just completely lost and not knowing what to do. And we did Gobber in the movie, as you guys know, that he was the one who basically taught Hiccup everything he knew in regard to all of his little inventions and all of his interesting contraptions, where he was able to create things such as the saddle for Toothless and the tail tail and even his leg that was lost after the end of the first movie. And so yeah, he was very good at tinkering, but now that he's no longer a blacksmith needing to use weapons, oh, by the way, that will be needed later on, wink wink. But yeah, we have Gobber, who actually finds himself another purpose and is able to contribute to Berk in a very unique way.
Yeah. The third episode is Animal House, which the dragons unintentionally cripple Berk's food productivity by terrifying the local livestock. This is the first winter storm coming. The dragon riding Viking use of Berk try to familiarize the local animals with their dragon companions, and they have enough food for the winter. So this is an interesting one itself. Like, how do you get dragons to make peace, not just with the humans, but also make peace with the livestock there as well? And so there's all that, and the way that it all comes about, where they lose it during the winter storm, and then they're all like out in the forest, and what on earth are they going to do? And so the thing that they do is that the dragons make it whether the area around them hospitable for life to continue. And so that's basically how they win the animals over, is that they're there, they are shown there to protect them and not there to eat them. So
it's almost kind of like a predecessor to what happened in The Wild Robot, if you remember, in which you have we have Roz, who eventually built this nice big hut so that they can be able to keep Fink and Roz warm from the winter storm, and then all the other animals come in because they're freezing, and now all these animals need to be able to get along so that they can be able to stay warm during the winter. So it's almost kind of like a predecessor to that in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's but I think this was done in a very good way. Like it gives you it makes you completely in disbelief. Like there's no way that Hiccup can basically pull this off, and then it's just this twist of fate that brings it all around. And I think that was a really good way to throw the audience into oh, how are they going to do this? And it's like, oh, that's how they do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was very good to do.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. We then get into episode 4, which is the Terrible Twos. Hiccup finds an injured baby dragon in the woods. Noting that this dragon is an undocumented species, he takes care of it and for closer study. Fishlegs names it Typhoomerang, but Toothless appears jealous and doesn't know what to warm up with the energetic Unicomer. Meanwhile, the baby's mother is making her way towards Berk to find the lost son. And this is a great episode as well. How do you do communication between the dragons and the humans? And it's up to Hiccup in order to kind of interpret how Toothless is thinking, because Toothless can't speak. He's not a speaking character, so he's got to somehow interpret where his dragon is at. And Hiccup gets it wrong, because you got Toothless trying to warn about this mother dragon that's going to come and evaporate the entire town and burn it to the ground, because obviously it's got its baby, and but Toothless can't interpret that over to communicate that over to Hiccup, because Hiccup doesn't understand what he's saying, or just trying to tell him what he just thinks he's jealous of the fact that he's got this other dragon. So it's great storytelling in that regard. I think it's a great episode, I think, and I think it also introduced the fact that Hiccup doesn't seem to understand himself. I mean, he's learning himself about this whole, the way that they interact with their dragons and how they do that. And obviously he's putting the Book of Dragons together as this whole thing goes along.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, plays into our final episode, at least for, this podcast anyway.
Yeah, and also the fact that Fishlegs was able to become a much more prominent character in this episode, because he was the one who was learning about all the dragons, because he learns a lot from reading the Book of Dragons. And he said, oh, I have never seen this dragon before. These are all the features that this particular dragon has compared to other dragons. And so they call it the Typhoomerang, which is basically a combination of typhoon and boomerang. And yeah, I mean, the dragon is really cool looking. And when you see the mother dragon, it's really vicious and very, very dangerous. And yeah, I just think that they were able to pull this story off better than Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs.
I think I'd definitely say they could, yes. So, Moving on to episode 5, so it's in Dragons We Trust. The dragons are blamed for vandalism, and Hiccup tries to prove their innocence by forming a night patrol called the Dragon United Monitoring Brigade. Dumb. But not in time to prevent the dragon's banishment from the island. Hiccup begins to suspect that Mildew is responsible for the damage. This is a really good episode, actually, and this is actually a two-parter because, we get into the 6th episode. Before we get into that, the fact that Mildew, frames the dragons for all the things that they've that they claim to have done, and sets this whole thing up. I think that is good in itself, and also, I mean, I guess in a way it ties into episode 6. So I think we probably go a little bit into that. I mean, the fact that Mildew is obviously we all see that he's responsible for the events of those 2 episodes, but obviously they can't prove what he did because he got rid of the evidence, and so it starts a really heated rivalry between Hiccup and Mildew, and but obviously Stoic can't do anything. You can't convict Mildew of high treason because of what he's done, because there's no proof to say that he did it. So, it's left everyone believing that Mildew is probably responsible for what happened, but they can't really pin it on him because he got rid of the evidence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a fantastic setup because, now it leaves us thinking, what's going to happen to this character as we go further along into the show? And, we've got to a halfway point at the minute, and we haven't really seen, any massive consequences to Mildew at the minute. He's just kind of been still there as the villain after that, so we're not really seeing any payoff of that yet. But I don't know, I feel like it's coming, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
I feel like it's coming.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that a lot of people were convinced that Mildew was right about the dragons being responsible for all these things, whether it be like, your shoes are missing, or, the stock is missing, or, there's damage that's going on. It's like, the dragons were the ones responsible for it. And
the street signs are all being turned around. Oh, wait, that's Stitch. And totally the wrong franchise. But
anyway, but yeah, it does make a lot of sense where Hiccup was doing the investigation on who was the one responsible for this, and he found out that Mildew was doing it with a lot of footprints and a lot of various other things that kind of made it look like that the dragons did it. But again, just like you said before, because he threw away the evidence, there's no way of proper proof that they can be able to say that Mildew was the one responsible for it. And so the episode kind of ends off with Stoic having this difficult decision of moving the dragons over to Dragon Island while they are basically just living off without their dragons, and that turns out to be a big problem with what happens next.
Yeah, because in the episode Alvin and the Outcast, we then get to see another bunch of villains, and so we get introduced to Alvin, the Treacherous, was it?
Yeah, the Treacherous.
Yeah, Alvin the Treacherous. So we're introduced to him, and because they got no weapons, because they got no dragons, they basically just walk in and cause chaos. Effectively, but then it's what happens is that Alvin is after what he calls the Dragon Conqueror, which he doesn't believe is Hiccup, but it is Hiccup. It's kind of funny because it feels like a callback to the first episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Zuko says, "Wait, you're the Avatar?" It's like so. Yeah, that was kind of fun.
Yeah, because he thought that the Avatar was an old man because he hadn't been seen in 100 years, and he's like, "Wait, you're just a kid."
Yeah.
So yeah, you have Hiccup, who is the Dragon Conqueror, but he's like, this scrawny little kid is going to be the one who conquers dragons who are dangerous and who scratch and bite and blow fire. Like, you're the Dragon Conqueror? No, this cannot be. But no, I mean, Hiccup was able to become really smart and say, you want to prove it? Take me to Dragon Island and I'll show you that I can control these dragons. And so, yeah, it's actually very smart at what he was able to do in order for him to get his dragons back.
Yeah, I think this episode, when you introduce a villain, you want to do something very drastic, and so obviously putting all the dragons onto an island, having them disarmed, I think, and then bringing in this this really wretched character, then to come in and just to cause all sorts of mayhem and maybe an absolute massive threat to it all. And also the fact that this Alvin is not just some I'm dumb massive Viking or anything like that. He's cold and calculating, and he realizes that Hiccup is the one who can control the dragons, and he wants to control them himself. himself.
Yeah.
So he's gonna and then he spends time devising schemes like to finally get hold of the Book of Dragons and to be able to do it. And so now we've got on top of having Mildew, obviously on top of everything. Now Hiccup has now got to contend with Alvin as well.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
So the villain count is starting to build up in this series, and this is just only like the 6th episode, and already we're starting to get development with not just the characters and the people in the village and the kids and everybody else, but also we get new villains that are brought into the series that actually bring a lot of threat with concrete motivation as to why they want to do it.
Yeah. So we then move on to How to Pick Your Dragon. That's the 7th episode. And this is Hiccup tries to convince Stoic to ride a dragon to aid him in his duties. And so he tries to train him up on Hiccup. Sorry, he tries to train him on Toothless, I should say. Good grief. Can you imagine Stoic riding Hiccup to do all this? Good grief. Anyway, so he gets him to ride Toothless. And then Stoic realizes how easy it is now to do things. But he ends up kind of taking Toothless out pretty much the entire day, and Hiccup is kind of left without a dragon, effectively. And so, if anything, this ends up kind of being more of a story, less about Stoic taking Hiccup's dragon ways. The fact that Stoic doesn't seem to listen to anybody, and so I think that disconnect between. That still exists between, his son and his dad is still evident in, even 8 episodes in. So, and that's, I think, focusing on the father-son, elements of this, because it has been been features of previous episodes, but I don't think it's ever been it's not really been put front and center, if you will. So it's always been one antic that's happened in the town, or this thing that's happened in the town, and this thing that it's not really been the father and son relationship has been parts of it, but it's never been center stage of it, and this is where it comes center stage.
Yeah,
I think,
and I think the reason why he's just completely ignoring him is because the fact that he's the chief of a village, and he believes that everything that he thinks is right. He's just doing this so that he can be able to do his duties as a chief, and so listening to his son, who he believes that doesn't know everything about what he thinks is important, he just basically ignores him, and he again takes his son's dragon so that he can be able to do all of his tasks. And eventually he realizes, well, I need a dragon of my own. Go find me a dragon and train it for me, without realizing of how difficult that would be. Mm-hmm. And so there's this dragon that is attacking all the fishermen that is apparently rumored to be as strong as Thor himself. And so we have this blue dragon who is able to blow out these sonic booms. And so
Tornado.
Yes, the Tornado. Yeah, he's
not to be confused with Sharknado.
Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so Tornado is the name of the dragon that eventually Stoic names it, and it's actually really sweet on why the dragon is acting out in the first place and why he's attacking the ships and why he's gathering up all the fish. Is because there's this friend dragon that he's actually caring for who has been injured, and so. That's the reason why the dragon has been acting this way. And so eventually Stoic starts to learn about how to get trust with the dragon. He starts developing an understanding.
I love how this is also done. It's this evil army of hogs that just appear and want to harm the injured dragon, and so then Stoic and Tornado have to learn to get on with one another and basically leave their stubbornness behind in order for them to survive. And so this whole action scene is fun.
Yeah,
it really is. I love it. You take two characters and they're never gonna get on because they're too hard-headed with one another. But then whether it's hero or villain, or whether it's side character or main character and a side character, or two supporting characters, whoever they happen to be, and then all of a sudden they're two powerful characters that amongst themselves, but then they come up with a threat that they know is too big for them, and then they're forced to combine together, and then they go through that threat, and then they come together as hey, maybe we're not as bad as we think we are, and we find some common ground on that. I love those scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say is that obviously it's only built up within one episode. It would have been interesting to see if they would have done that over a series. I mean, it'd be kind of hard to do Tornado and Stoic, but I always when it's a slow burn where you start off with maybe at the beginning of the show, or maybe halfway through the show, and you kind of build that relationship over that spites with one another, like, over a couple of episodes, and then they finally come together, and it's like, okay, well, we can be friends now, or we can have some respect from each other, at least start from that point.
Yeah, now I can understand from the movie in which that Hiccup and Toothless were able to connect with each other pretty quickly, but that was a movie. You only have an hour and a half to play around with, whereas a TV series, I mean, there's 20 episodes in here, so I mean, I'm sure that they could have probably stretched it out maybe just a little bit, like maybe like 2 episodes or 3 or maybe even 5. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I can understand, like, due to the circumstances of what was happening, I guess that they needed to just speed it up really quickly.
I guess so. So then we move on to a portrait of Hiccup as a buff man, and I like this episode because Bucket basically paints this portrait of, like, there's all these other ones that have, like, been, obviously there's the father, and then there's, like, the buff son, and so that is then painted, and so I really like this because Hiccup is made to feel uncomfortable about himself, and about his image and everything like that, because it doesn't portray what he feels the village thinks that he is. And I thought they were going to go into some interesting territory here, because obviously Hiccup isn't, like, built like all the other Vikings are, and he doesn't have, like, a big muscly body type that all the other ones do. And so it's funny that he's made to feel, even though he's done all these amazing things, he's felt like just because he's not physically intimidating, he's made to feel insignificant, which I think is a really good commentary. I think that just because you don't look a certain way doesn't mean you're not capable of achieving great things. I thought it was a really great message, I thought. And also it was great. Also, spoilers for, man, we're going to spoilers in this anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But the fact that it's revealed at the end, like, one of the most revered sons of the tribe himself was a Hiccup, that's, I thought, was actually really a really good message to say that history is sort of kind of, like, glamorized a little bit, and probably, like, a bit over exaggerated in a way of, like, what it actually was, and then the real the reality is that it wasn't what people thought it was, and actually it's completely different. I think that was a good message, I think, also to say in as well, that sometimes we kind of, like, over romanticize, I think, historical events, I think, and not really what they actually are. Yeah, in truth.
Yeah, exactly. So the core of the episode is that you have one of the ancestors, Hamish II, who essentially built, like, this map where there's this unknown treasure, and you have to solve a whole bunch of riddles. And so Hiccup wants to be able to prove himself to Stoic, who never found it, that if he found it, maybe he will get the respect that he deserves. And so
it's a classic tale, isn't it? Like, it's just it's the son that feels like he's not lived up to his mantle, and so he's got to go out to prove himself, to his dad, and then his dad is horrified because, like, well, it's something I tried to do and I couldn't do it, and I almost got killed because of it, and now he's going to go out and do that, and, like, Stoic feels responsible for that as well. I thought that was really good. This is such a great episode. I thought, it's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ending was also, like, really, really great, where it was revealed that Stoic was feeling the guilt of, trying to put his son in a pedestal that wasn't rightfully so, where he thought that, okay, well, yeah, I mean, this is a great picture. I mean, I love this picture of you as a buff kid, but in reality, that's not who Hiccup is. And the fact that he realized that and he apologized was actually a great scene, and just a way to really strengthen the father-son relationship, and it makes it even more sadder on what happened at the end of the second movie.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, before we get into that, we got 2 episodes to go. So the 9th episode is Dragonflower, and so there's a trader who comes in, and they get a whole bunch of new stuff, and then all of a sudden the dragons start getting sick. So then they have to bury all the stuff in a pit, but then they realize the dragons are still getting ill and are now dying, and they find out that actually it's because these flowers that have been planted by mildew have started sprouting up, and that's what's making the dragons sick. So they have to come up with a cure to basically help out the dragons, and the only way that they can do that is to find a sea dragon that basically spoots out loads of venom.
Yeah, the Skuldron.
The Skuldron. And let's just say that mildew makes a very helpful way of like delivering over the venom, and so and I think Gobber will never be the same again after that. I think, never. I think that's a massive character evolution change will come from Gobber from what he just did. But I think that's that's one of the more hilarious episodes, but also like one of the more mind you. Here's the thing about this, like I don't really like episodes that are like, oh, the characters are dying, what are they going to do? But it's like, well, there's going to be a second movie anyway, so of course we know what's going to happen. Like, there's no, it kind of feels like, because you already know there's always going to be like, they're going to survive this at the end, because you're not going to end the whole series on the 9th episode, are you?
No.
Like, it's just, no. So, like, I knew they were going to be fine anyway, so the tension sort of kind of like, isn't there really, but I guess if you're a younger viewer, I guess it probably is.
And especially if you haven't seen the first movie.
Well, I guess so, yeah, so maybe.
All right, then.
Yeah. And then finally we get to the 10th episode, which is a cliffhanger. So, unfortunately, everybody, you're going to have to wait a minute to, wait for the next episode for us to tell you about our thoughts on the next one. But this is Heather Report Part 1. So, they find this mysterious girl called Heather who's washed up on Thor's beach. She claims that they were attacked by pirates and she washed up and saying she lost her parents, because of that. So, this is the problem with though, is that Heather is such a mysterious character. We don't know what's a truth and we don't know what's a lie in this. And so Astrid is very, suspicious of Heather for all sorts of reasons, not just the fact that she seems to be getting a lot of the attention of Hiccup, and so as you can see, there's a bit of like tension going on there between. Yeah,
she makes it like, Hiccup, we were supposed to be having a race together on who's training their dragon to go the fastest. I mean, it makes it look like that at first, and it kind of is, but you could tell that she's kind of like,
you're gonna kind of sympathize with Hiccup's situation, because all of a sudden this poor girl has turned up on a beach. She's been attacked by pirates and her parents have been killed, and obviously she's all alone in the world, and they don't know what to do. And what Hiccup doesn't realize is that it's all a lie, and that she's actually with the outcasts, and she's actually doing it Alvin's bidding.
Yeah, she's trying to steal the Book of Dragons.
Yeah. And by the way, she's played by Mae Whitman, and Mae Whitman does a fantastic job selling her as like this sweet innocent girl, but then has a darker sinister side. She does such a good job with this.
Yeah, very similar to her character in American Dragon, Jake Long, in which she starts off as like this really nice girl, but then she turns out, she's actually the villain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's great because, that's how Mae Whitman is. It's like, she can be like really strong and really determined like Katara, or she can be like, the evil bad guy like she was in American Dragon Jake Long or Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yeah, exactly. I think Mae Whitman's just such a great talent, and I think they were very good to secure her, I think, for this. And so the way that we leave it off is that, Heather steals the Book of Dragons and makes off on, Astrid's dragon, though she can't ride it all that well, and even though she's read the book, and so they do manage to keep up with her, but during the melee of like everything that's going on, they lose the Book of Dragons, and it's assumed at the end of the episode that Alvin now has the book. So we've not seen part 2 yet, so we have no idea what damage has been done, but I'm sure when we do the next episode, I'm pretty sure we'll let all know what we think of it. So.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see about what happens next in this particular cliffhanger, now that they have captured Heather, but they lost the book. So, again, we're very sorry that we're going to leave it off at this cliffhanger, but we hope that you have enjoyed us talking about the first 10 episodes of Dragons, the Riders of Berk.
Yeah. So I guess 10 episodes in, what do you think so far?
I've been enjoying this very much.
I'm enjoying this as well. Like, I was a bit worried because I thought, I thought this was going to be like, a bunch of like, happy, fun episodes of like, where them just messing around with dragons and, nothing really was going to come of it. But no, it looks like they actually are making an effort to link the events of the first movie over to the second movie. And so they're telling us about everything that's kind of gone on, in between those times. So I think they've actually put some really good thought into this, I think. And so, yeah, right now, I think, it's a fantastic series. So far, 10 episodes in. So, it's definitely not like Monsters of Work where, like, we have some really good episodes at the very beginning and then it goes all like, cold in the middle and then all of a sudden it starts to kind of like make its way up, again to like some sort of standard. No, there's actually a standard of a great standard actually left, that's left leveled out throughout the entire series, the 10 episodes that we've seen. There's not been one bad episode, I don't think.
No, there hasn't. It's been really consistent, and there's been some episodes that have been funny, and then there's been some episodes that have been a little bit more heartfelt and dramatic. And so I like that they were able to play the elements to it, and it does feel consistent with the movies. It's like after you watch the movie, you can easily jump right into the animated series, and it's almost like you're seeing the events that happen between the first and the second movie. It's like, oh, this is where it led up towards, because when you see the second movie, it's like, the characters are older, they've gotten more accustomed to the dragons and everything, so it's like, what happened in between? And so this answers it, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think if we had to pick, like, our most favorite and least favorite episodes, so my favorite episode had to be Portrait of Hiccup as a buff man, because I think episode 8, I think, it goes into so many emotional messaging. It goes into so many good moments with our characters. I think it builds the, more of a relationship going on between Stoic and Hiccup. I think that it does that very well in that regard, and it also brings Gobber along for the ride as well, because you get to see that Stoic and Gobber go way back too in everything that they've done. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really good episode. If I had to pick a least favorite episode, I'd probably have to go with Dragonflower, just because it's like, yeah, the dragons are dying, but we know they're going to die anyway. So like, it's it just feels like you're just creating dramatic effect for no reason. And also Mildew, as we know, is just once again a really bad, a really awful villain. So like, which I don't mean that in a terrible way. I just mean like, oh hey, Mildew's doing villainary things. Like, here we go again. It's kind of like, it kind of feels like, there's no besides Mildew, obviously providing the hilarious like finale to the episode. I mean, like, he doesn't really like he's kind of more like Robotnik in like in this, like he gets his hilarious comeuppance at the end. The Adventures of Sonic Hedgehog, but just it's so if I had to say, my favorite episode probably has to be Portrait of Hiccup as a buff man, and my least favorite episode has to be Dragonflower.
Yeah, I would say the same thing with my favorite episode as well. It is also Portrait of Hiccup as a buff man. If I had to choose, it would definitely be a tie between Dragonflower and the Terrible Twos, because with the Terrible Twos, it's like, yes, I mean, you have this one dragon who comes in, and you have the mother chasing after him. Again, it was giving me like Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs vibes. So yeah, I mean, I mean, unless they bring back the character.
If it wasn't for the fact that it was describing the difficult relationship between humans and dragons in regards to like in a communication level, and Hiccup obviously himself doesn't realize that. If it wasn't for that, I probably would agree with you. But I think in regards to like the between the Terrible Twos and Dragonflower, I feel like the Terrible Twos had a better message than Dragonflower.
Yeah, that's why I said it was kind of like a tie, because I can take it or leave it with either of them.
Okay, then.
But yeah, I definitely do agree that if I had to choose like a bad episode between those two, I do agree that Dragonflower would be it, because it feels very inconsequential. It's like, it's kind of like a one and done deal, where it's like, that the characters are going to be coming back in the second and the third movie and all the other specials. So yeah, it's like, oh, the dragons are sick. What are we going to do? It's like, we have to help them before they die. It's like, you're going to be fine. Just relax.
Yeah.
All right, so that is it for our discussion of the first half of DreamWorks Dragons, which we've been really enjoying so far. So tune in next time, as we're going to go into the second half of season 1. So until then, everyone, we hope that you enjoy it, and so take care.
Again, bye for now.